Hello, welcome to Gardener's World and welcome back. It's nice to be out in the garden again with spring opening out daily. The weather of course is still variable at this time of year, but I'm taking every opportunity to get outside in the garden and get on with all those jobs that need doing now in order for the garden to look as good as possible for the rest of the year. Now, one of them is pruning Buddleia, which needs to be pruned hard to promote the new growth that will carry this summer's flowers. Now, in some places of the country you can do this as early as February, but March is normally the best time. But if you leave it, what happens is the new growth grows much better at the top because it's closer to the light. That shades out the bottom and you get this bare, very woody, leggy plant. So I can get in there and I can prune right there, take that out, and I'm cutting just above a new shoot. And as long as you have some new growth below where you cut, you really can go as low as you like. So if I cut there like that, and now I've got 1, 2, 3 shoots, and all of those will grow strongly and all of them should carry flowers. On today's programme, we join Sue Kent on her allotment. She plans a radical redesign of her plot.
I inherited someone else's design, and the layout of their design doesn't work for me in the way that I garden.
And Carol visits Bressingham Gardens in Norfolk to explore its spectacular winter garden and stunning collection of conifers.
Conifers are a mind-bogglingly diverse group of plants. They can be all sorts of shapes, sizes, textures and colours.
And I'm replanting a rose that was growing initially here in the Jewel Garden, but I'm moving it to the cottage garden. Well, there have been dramatic changes here in the Jewel Garden and the cottage garden over winter. Because after battling box blight for nearly 10 years now, we've given up and grubbed out nearly all the box hedges here in the Jewel Garden and in the cottage garden. Now, obviously, we could replace them with something that doesn't get blight, and that's a perfectly good option. But instead, we've decided to embrace the opportunity and see it as a chance to do something that we couldn't do before. Because while we had the hedges, all the plants had to be taller than the hedge to be seen. Now they're not here and we've lined the paths with metal edging. We can plant right up to the edge with smaller, more delicate things that still have the jewel colours, and that's what I'll be doing over the next weeks and months. But we still have to do our normal housekeeping in the borders, and this time of year is perfect for dividing herbaceous perennials. And I want to divide this cardoon. Now remember, an herbaceous perennial is a plant that dies back completely over winter above ground, but in fact its roots are completely alive and healthy, and then it puts on an enormous surge of growth from spring through into summer. Now, the cardoon is a beautiful border plant. These lovely glaucous grey leaves that will grow about 5, 6 feet tall, and then they throw up these giant flowering spikes like a huge artichoke. But this is the moment to divide it. And the easiest way to do it is simply to chop off a section. The roots are quite firm and quite deep, so you need to get down as deep as possible. I do regularly split the cardoons and move them because that does reinvigorate them as much as anything else, and you get really good new growth. And that's a good rule of thumb for all herbaceous perennials. There we go, there we go. That's coming up. So you can see what I have here is a generous clump. Now I could plant that as it is, or I could divide it into 3 or even 4 sections. And the way I'll do that is dead easy, because I'm simply going to chop it. There we go. Now you can see that it's got a really woody root, and it's very likely to die back somewhat and to grow slowly in the first year. So don't have any great hopes of it surging away. Give it a year or so to get going. In fact, what I'm going to do is pop these into pots, because I'm not quite certain exactly where they want to go. So that can go in a pot just for a day or two while I work out where it's going to go. I'll pack that round with potting compost. It doesn't have to be good compost. In fact, you can have reused compost for this, because it's only a temporary home for it. And some plants take to division like a duck to water, and they hardly notice it. And what you will see is after a week or two, they will all grow with absolutely visible renewed energy. And of course, you are creating plants for free. There we go. Now I will give these a really good soak and then start placing them where I think I want them to grow. One of the things that has been apparent over the last 12 months is the way that people have turned to their gardens, often returned to their gardens or discovered them for the first time. And this year, we want to celebrate the many ways that people have maximised their spaces. And we're starting off with a visit to Leeds and the garden of James Lester, who has created something really special from very unlikely beginnings.
The planting feels like an oasis. It's not like anything else that I've come across in Leeds. It's a really tranquil space to be sat in. We rented the place for 9 years. We bought the house off our landlord, and obviously I'd had 9 years to think about what I wanted to do. The back garden is 15 by 16 feet. It has a staircase that comes through the middle of it and takes up a lot of that space. It's northeast facing, so it gets a little bit of sun in the morning. Because it's at the bottom of 3 stories, it's shady for the rest of the day. And throughout the winter, it barely gets any sun at all. When we put the fences in, we drilled them in and realized just how thick the concrete was. So we got the pots. They were a job lot on the internet. And then all of a sudden, 200-ish pots arrived and the world was our oyster. The tropical theme came about simply because I was choosing the right plants for the right places. And it turned out that sort of these big glossy leaves, which sort of filled out the space, a lot of them are sort of bog plants, but they will grow well in a pot if you keep up to watering them. The hero plants in the garden are the big ones that really add structure and shape and create this sort of canopy. So they include the gunnera. They make the place feel bigger, as counterintuitive as that might be, putting a big plant in a small place, but it really makes you feel smaller, so the place feels bigger. Height is quite important to such a small footprint garden, so having the large Trachycarpus, a large bamboo, the tree ferns as well, those are the plants that really sort of give structure to the garden. Having a canopy of leaves encloses the space, and in such a public area, surrounded by all these houses, it really sort of creates this sort of solitude, and it even helps block out a lot of the noise from all the neighbours. It just sort of, it feels like a cocoon of greenery. Having a lot of bog plants in means I'm watering a lot. All the plants in here create all the humidity needed for growing tropical plants. But the fence, because it's slatted, sort of helps let the wind through, but I also like to play with the light. Because the light comes in at such a harsh angle, the slatted fences create all this sort of dynamic layering throughout the garden, and it makes it feel bigger than it is. The leaves create all sorts of shadows, and they sort of diffuse the light as they come through because they're so big, and it just sort of filters the light through really nicely. It's a really nice place to sit. So I decked the garden about 18 months after starting. A lot of the pots were already in situ. In the biggest pot in the corner, there's Acer Bloodgood. There are hellebores and hostas and a number of ferns. So big that I couldn't move it anymore, so I decked around it. But everything else being on the deck means that I don't have to lift them to protect them from frost. They're already lifted off the ground. On the left-hand side here was an unusable space. It was full of junk, and it's about 6 feet deep in deepest shade. So what I've done to solve that problem and keep the space usable is fix pallets at different heights with plenty of space underneath to store spring bulbs and all my tools. It's essentially a little shed, but with plenty of green roof space, and not just sort of your typical sedum green roof. It's full of hostas and ferns. The garden definitely stands out from everyone else's garden. There's a large wall, but a lot of the plants peek out over the top, and there's a lot of comments on sizes of leaves and things that people can see. So it does get a lot of positive comments. I was taking the dog for a walk, and one of my neighbours down the road was growing courgettes, and so I started talking to her about her space and her garden, and I showed her my garden, and we took it from there, and she's just run with it.
James encouraged me to think about the yard in a different way. Me and James have got this joke that the one word I wanted someone to use when they were looking at my yard was voluptuous. So I wanted the space, although it to be small and condensed and with lots of dainty flowers, I wanted it to look really full, really rich and really voluptuous. For example, the clematis are very vigorous climbers. We've got the wisteria down here, so I'm hoping in about 25 years' time I may have a wisteria growing up the side of the house, but I'll wait for that to happen. This space has generated quite a lot of interest amongst people who live locally. And James showed me in a small space you can do a lot with it. From there, I'm hoping to inspire some other people around me to do the same.
It's so incredible thinking back when those pots were delivered, and it was just concrete and a few plastic pots, and the difference of what's been achieved. I'm really happy with how it's come to fruition.
Well, I think that James's garden is really inspirational. It does show you that even with just thick concrete, small space, shade, you can still make something wonderful. Now here on this table, every spring I have a display of very small plants, but they have big colour. So you have the iris, these lovely muscari. You've got the scillas, and of course daffodils, and I choose dwarf ones like tete-a-tete. And they all just sing out for spring. Now I planted all these as bulbs last September and October, and in fact some of them carry on year after year. But if you haven't done that, you can still get these little gems from garden centres, nurseries, or if you go online, you can buy them now and they will brighten up your garden for a few weeks to come. Last year, we asked if you would send us films of your experience in your gardens, and we were overwhelmed by both the quantity and the quality of the response. You made us laugh, you made us cry, you inspired us, you informed us, you surprised us. So we'd love to continue that. If you've got a garden that you love or an idea that you think you'd like to share, or even just a favourite plant, make a film and send it in to us. And if you go to our website, you'll get all the instructions of what to do and a little bit of advice on how to do it. And our first film comes from a mother and daughter gardening combination from Chelmsford.
Hello Gardeners World, my name's Anushka and this is my mum Rani. Hello. We live in Essex and love growing vegetables. These are our chilies and tomatoes, and our aubergine has a flower, so hopefully we'll have the fruit soon.
But this summer we had something more exciting. This is a snake gourd plant. Snake gourd is a commonly used vegetable in Asian cuisine, especially in stir fries and curries. And the flowers have this very nice and delicate lacy pattern at the edges. Baby snake gourds tend to grow a little bit wiggly, and traditionally we tie a stone at the end of the fruit to make it grow straight. And we can see that we had done the same thing for these snake gourds as well, and it has grown relatively straight. In tropical climates, this can grow up to 6 feet. Ours is not that big. Let us measure. It is just over 1.5 feet there. We are really inspired by this resilience of this plant, which has grown here and produced fruit outside the greenhouse. And I'll be trying to collect seeds from this and grow next year as well.
Well, I hope Anushka and Rani did keep the seeds of their snake gourd, and I suspect they've already sown it. And if they can grow a 6-foot long one this year, wouldn't that be fantastic? I confess I had not heard of a snake gourd, let alone grown one. But like them, I do grow chilies. And this year, I thought we might grow some chilies together. You don't need a garden, you don't need a greenhouse. They grow perfectly well on a windowsill, on a balcony, a roof garden. The one thing that they do need is some sunshine and heat. So they're not a plant for a dark, shady corner. But hopefully, by the end of the summer, early autumn, we'll be harvesting some really good chilies. Now, the first variety that I've chosen is one that is very common. It's called De Cayenne, and it's a medium hot one. And it's got lots and lots of medium-sized, quite slim chilies. And by and large, it's one of the easier ones to grow. It's not too fussy, so it's a really good one to start with. Now, I've got a peat-free compost. This is based on a coir mix, and then I modify it by adding sieve leaf mould, a little bit of sieved garden compost, and some grit to open it out. But to be honest, chilies will grow in any compost mix. Now, as far as you can, put the seeds evenly, because one of the secrets of successful seed growing is to have the seedlings growing strongly from the very beginning. It's a mistake to think that you can just scatter the seed any old how and they'll all sort themselves out, because that then becomes survival of the fittest, and a lot of the seedlings won't do very well. But having sown the seeds, the next thing to do is cover them lightly like that. That's plenty. The next variety is unusual for a chili. It's called Padron. It's a Spanish chili. And you eat it green, and it's not hot at all. It's fruity. So even if you don't like the heat of chilies, you can grow these and enjoy them. Nicely spaced out. At this stage, it is really important, when you've watered them, to give them some heat. If you don't have a greenhouse or a heated mat, they will grow perfectly well on a windowsill above a radiator. But they won't germinate if the heat drops much below 20 degrees. And then be patient, and in a few weeks' time, when the seedlings start to appear, I will share with you what to do next on this journey towards a lovely chilli harvest later on in summer. Now, last summer we met Sue Kent in her garden in Swansea. And this year we're joining her on her allotment as she tackles it to get ready for the new growing season.
A few miles from my house I have an allotment plot. I haven't really done much with it because I find it overwhelming. But last autumn I decided to get stuck in and make it work for me.
And this is my plot, so I've got some artichokes here. I love artichokes. I've got pumpkins over there. I inherited someone else's design, and the layout of their design doesn't work for me in the way that I garden.
I'm determined to transform this plot so it suits my needs. But as a beginner, I could do with some advice. So I've invited Joe to give me a hand. He's an allotment guru and very handy with a spade.
Thanks for coming to my allotment.
Well, it's a beautiful site here. It's gorgeous.
Yeah, fab.
How's this working for you, this plot?
It's not really working. The paths around me are uneven, which makes it difficult to balance when I tend to work and weed with 1 foot. Another thing is they're quite wide. I can only reach that far.
Yeah.
And otherwise I end up walking on the beds.
I do most of my gardening using my feet, so I need to redesign the beds so that they are narrow enough for me to reach across.
So how far do you want to be able to reach into, or can you reach into?
Happily I can reach into about 40 centimetres.
That is exactly 40 centimetres. Okay, so that's the middle.
So we
And
need
then,
80 then, double
yeah.
that.
Okay, yeah, double that from my side, good point. So 80 centimetres is there.
Yeah.
So that is going to be the width of your bed,
Yeah, I think that's going to be great. And
narrower than it is now.
Yeah.
For your general path width.
I think 50 is going to be fine.
But you're very nimble on your feet, so, you know, you can...
Yeah, I'm nimble on my feet.
And you want more growing space.
I want more growing space because I've reduced the growing space. I'm prepared to have narrower paths.
I'll string it out.
Okay,
How about
lovely. Thank you.
Okay. A 50 centimetre path is going to be wide enough for Sue, but it's worth considering making walkways wider if you want access for a wheelbarrow or a wheelchair. Today I'm going to help Sue create her first bed and 2 pathways, starting with marking out the area where the beds will go. But there you go, Sue. What do you think? Does it work for you?
Yeah, that does work for me. I think these paths will be fine. This looks good.
So next, so I'm going to level off the path areas. Do you want me to dig over the beds as well, get some weeds out for you?
I'm thinking about being a bit radical. I'm thinking about doing no dig. What do you think?
Saves a lot of work for me, which is good. Pioneered by Charles Dowding. It's all about, you know, keeping the soil structure, keeping the moisture within the soil, and suppressing weeds, but no digging at all.
And I think it'd be really good for me that I don't have to dig, which I find quite tiring.
Yeah, it would be absolutely perfect for you, wouldn't it? OK, so I'm going to pull this string up and get it out of the way because we've got to lay the cardboard down.
OK, and I'll start on the edging, removing it.
Yeah, great.
I don't want raised beds because I find it hard to reach over them with my feet.
By the time you've done that, I might have just about got the string on a bit of bamboo.
You're supposed to be helping.
No, I know you're doing it all. Right, here we go. Before we get going, I need to take out the bumps on the pathway to make it easier for Sue to walk on. I think this will be the last bit of digging this site sees for a long time. I can totally see what she's aiming at, but I do love a bit of digging. Now we can start our bed. The no-dig method principle revolves around not disturbing the soil, so no to any digging, and that includes the weeds. Instead, soil is left undisturbed and we add weed-suppressing material like cardboard. Think of it as a compost sandwich. I'm starting by giving the soil a gentle rake too, so that it's ready for the cardboard.
Yeah, maybe if you start at that end.
Okay, I'll start at this end.
And the key is to overlap them.
Okie dokie.
So
I'm going to need my toes out for this one.
a bit of overlapping action going on there, rather than butting them up. If they butt up, the weeds can just grow through like that.
Okay.
Now these layers will starve the weeds of light, and as they die, they will enrich the soil. We're placing the cardboard right across the path and the bed.
So it's really important to water the cardboard before you start putting the mulch on top,
Right, why is that then?
because it starts the biodegrading quicker. of
Okay,
it.
yeah,
So
right, okay.
This is your finest watering can, isn't it?
No, this is my finest one. It's lovely.
You've been saving it for me.
It's going to be the proof of the pudding, as they say. It's going to be a meeting, isn't it?
is,
Very
yeah.
definitely.
And I'll go and get some of this
Yeah.
this lovely compost.
And you can sort of tip it in and I'll move it along if necessary, or...
Yeah, yeah. Oh, this is exciting. Where do you want it?
Well, start here.
Right, yeah,
in between
that's
my
the line.
shoes. Oh, it feels lovely.
For the final layer, you put organic matter on top of the cardboard. We're using a peat-free potting compost.
And you want it nice and deep. I mean, sort of minimum of 4 inches, really.
Right, okay.
You know, 10 centimetres.
Now, you could use homemade or green manure compost or well-rotted manure. Leave the beds for a few months so the weeds die off. The cardboard breaks down and the weather and soil organisms work their magic.
Tread it down. Firm but not compact, please.
Okie dokie, I'm on it.
It's time to get the path down, and I've chosen wood chippings as it's nice and spongy underfoot.
Thanks for the help. I couldn't have done it without you, definitely.
Pleasure, I really enjoyed doing it, I have to say. But one last thing. Now, you see, you can't turn up to an allotment without a gift. This is some rhubarb.
Oh.
Every allotment's got to have some rhubarb.
Thank you.
So I'll leave
I
you
love
with that.
rhubarb.
Well, I'm going to be watching, see how you're getting on.
Yeah, all the pressure's on then.
The pressure is definitely on.
Oh, no. I've got 1 bed and 2 paths in, and I've got 4 more beds to do, which I'll take my time with and get them done by the winter. But for now, at the end of the day, I'm going to just get my rhubarb in.
Come on now. In you come. In you go. Can I have it? Thank you. Good girl. We'll be joining Sue later on in the summer to follow her progress on her allotment. Now let me introduce you to the latest addition to Longmeadow. This is the culmination of a lifetime's gardening dream. And it's a small section of a large commercial greenhouse that got badly damaged in a storm. Now, it's proved a brilliant place to store tender plants like the citrus and the olives and the gingers, but also to grow winter salad crops. And this bed is filled with parsley and rocket. We love parsley and eat it all the time. But the thing I really want you to notice is how widely spaced the individual plants are. This was a batch sown in August, and these have been picked over 2 or 3 times this winter, and yet they're still giving lots of leaves. And that is the secret of parsley. It wants to be a big plant. It's a member of the carrot family. It's got a deep taproot and will produce lots and lots of leaves if you just give it a chance. Now, still to come on today's programme. Carol celebrates winter colour at Bressingham Gardens in Norfolk. And we visit Clumber Park in Nottinghamshire as we get a grand tour of their incredible national collection of rhubarb.
To most people, a rhubarb's a rhubarb, isn't it, really? But within 130 varieties, there are loads of different profiles and characteristics.
But first, we have one of your films, sent to us from an allotment where dahlias take centre stage.
Hi, I'm Nicole and welcome to my allotment here in Peterborough. My plot is only 63 square metres, but I've absolutely rammed in as much as I can, and I'm totally obsessed with dahlias, in case you hadn't noticed. I've got 43 different plants here and around 20 different varieties. I absolutely love them, and it's the main reason I have the plot. Throughout lockdown, my allotment really was my sanctuary. I would head down there every evening after I'd finished a day working from home, pick the dahlias and just spend a bit of time outside. It made me feel like I had a sense of purpose because the dahlias were there every evening, ready for me to enjoy them. I ended up with so many dahlias that I asked my friends and family to nominate people who'd worked in exceptional circumstances during lockdown, and I delivered bunches of the dahlias to them. So many of them had never even seen a dahlia before, so it made me even happier to share them with them. For some reason, dahlias fell out of fashion a few years ago, and I have no idea why. From one tuber, you can get an abundance of flowers that will last you all summer, all the way through to the frosts, and they're great cut flowers. I mean, look at them. Why wouldn't you want these?
Well, I think Nicole's dahlias look glorious. And I do remember in the 80s and 90s that they weren't just out of fashion, they were somehow seen as the mark of someone who didn't have good gardening taste. So it was rather a snobbish approach to them, which is just ridiculous because dahlias are fantastic. And by the way, if you've never grown them before, they can be grown by seed. And next week, I'm going to be sowing some. And if you sow some at the same time, I will steer you through the process of raising them in the coming weeks and months. But for the moment, I'm not planting dahlias, I'm planting a rose, or actually replanting a rose, because this used to be in the dual garden. Now that we've taken out the box hedges from here in the cottage garden, as well as the dual garden, it's created more space. And the reason I moved it was not because I didn't want a rose in the dual garden, but roses don't do well in there for the first few years because the competition is so great from the herbaceous plants all around them that the poor rose gets shaded out. And if it doesn't get a good start, then you can have trouble. And what I've learnt is give the rose a good start with lots of light and air and sunshine, and then they're as tough as old boots and they'll be fine. Now, this one, which is called Falstaff, actually I'm going to grow as a climber, a small climber, so I'll erect a tripod around it. But when you move a rose, don't expect heroics. It won't do much for a year or even two because it's a dramatic thing to move a plant. When you're planting a rose, and there's still plenty of time to do this, you do need to have a nice deep hole, but whether it's a rose, a tree or a shrub, don't add any compost or goodness inside the planting hole. That can go on the surface because what you want the roots to do is go out, to leave the planting hole and go as wide as possible and to adapt to the soil. Whereas if you fill the planting hole with goodness, of course the roots don't leave, they just stay there and effectively they become pot bound. Now this, as I say, has been moved, so although it's in a pot, all the soil is going to fall off it when I take it out. And this now is effectively a bare root plant. Now bare root plants you can buy, tends to be in winter, so we're coming to the end of the season, but they're cheaper, you tend to have a wider variety. when you get them, you do need to plant them straight away. So that has a limited root system, but you can see here where my finger is, that's the graft, and that's the root stock there, and that is the top growth. And that wants to be underground, so I will plant it roughly where my finger is, like that. But before I do it, I'm going to add mycorrhizal fungi. And what this will do is kickstart the relationship between the fungi in the soil and the roots. It doesn't necessarily work miracles, but it certainly helps, particularly if you're replanting something from the ground. So that's the level, about like that. We'll backfill around it. What I will do, having planted it, is cut it back. Any rows you plant should be pruned immediately after planting. It will stimulate vigorous new growth, hopefully spreading the stems, and that will result in a much healthier, stronger plant than if I leave it. And as well as cutting back and planting, of course, there is one thing you absolutely have to do when you plant anything, let alone replant it, and that's give it a good drink. And if it's very dry, particularly when we get to May or June and there's early growth, you may need to water it again. Just don't let it dry out for the first year. Now, in high summer, the cottage garden is voluptuous with colour. It froths with pinks and reds and is a complete rich joy. However, by midwinter, there is very little colour to see anywhere in Longmeadow. We have lots of structure, but colour there ain't. However, we've now got another chance to see and get some inspiration from Carol's visit to the Winter Garden in Bressingham, Norfolk.
For some of us, our gardens can be very uninspiring in the winter. There's no colour about, everything's dull and drab. But here at Bressingham Gardens, that picture is completely reversed. The whole place is a sparkle with colour, wonderful shapes and forms, and the plants that create this picture more than any others are the conifers. Conifers are a mind-bogglingly diverse group of plants. They can be all sorts of shapes, sizes, textures and colours. And conifers go beautifully with other plants, especially at this time of year. What a symphony in gold and purple, full of intense, rich colour. This witch hazel, the Hamamelis, is lit in the winter with these golden, spidery flowers. And how beautifully that colour's taken up here by this conifer. This is a golden form of the incense cedar. It's got these beautifully flattened fronds. And that's emphasised by nipping back growing shoots to keep it nice and dense. And that's not the only bit that's pruned either. Look at the trunk. All this bark is exposed because all the twigs and branches have very deliberately been taken away. But what makes it work so beautifully is what accompanies it on the ground. There are these great sweeping lines of Acorus, and through it a little black Ophiopogon. And as if that wasn't enough, here and there are these surprises. Hellebores popping up and snowdrops sprinkle through the whole thing. And it's the kind of combination that any of us could emulate in our own gardens. It's just something that you want to rush home and do yourself. One of the delights of this garden is coming across these absolutely brilliant specimen. Hugely special conifers here and there. This is a Japanese black pine. At this time of year, it's got an extra special feature, and that is these new emerging buds, which are just like silver candles. And they pick up the white bark of the betula in the background. All the way through this bed, there's a very distinctive colour theme, but it's not kaleidoscopic, it's limited. So you've got the green of the conifer and the ivy at its feet. And then you've got these red stems of the Cornus alba sibiricus, and that's reflected at ground level by these big solid leaves of the begonia. All you need is a few simple elements, but think most of all about what conifer is going to be your centrepiece. Don't these really prove the point of just how wonderful conifers can be? These little blue spruces here are going on for 20 years old, and so too are the pines in front of them. They're so slow growing that they'll maintain this kind of shape, and they really help to accentuate the whole curve of this path. I think what's so lovely about them too is that this sort of solidity is emphasised all the more by putting behind them as a kind of theatrical backdrop this lovely Cornus midwinter fire. And then running through the whole bed is stachys that melds the whole planting together, and punctuated here and there by these little jewel-like Crocus thomasinianus. The whole planting works so beautifully together. It's totally inspiring. Conifers are such wonderfully versatile plants. You can use them as single specimens or put them together in a conifer garden. But I think the very best way of using them of all is to put them together with other plants, thus creating a gallery of form, texture, colour.
I have been to Bressingham, but I went in summer, and certainly seeing that makes me want to go in the middle of winter. And of course, it's the intensity of all those different greens that adds such power to what would otherwise be a bare winter garden. It's time now to visit the last of your gardens today, and it's taking us up to the north of Scotland, where we share the joys and tribulations of potato planting.
Hello, welcome to our garden. My name's Hattie.
I'm Ben.
And we live in the northeast of Scotland in Aberdeen. And we'd love to plant some tatties with you.
So we've got our cardboard box, and to make sure that we have good enough drainage for our potatoes, we're just going to pierce the bottom of it with a fork. So, one here.
So these are our first seed potatoes. We've never grown potatoes before. We've left them for 2 weeks on the windowsill to chit. So you can see they're looking quite nice now. And this is our first time trying to plant them. So we're just gonna space these apart with the eyes upwards where need be, but they've got so many eyes on them anyway. And pop them in there. They're on about 1 to 2 inches of soil, and see how they do at that distance. We're gonna keep our eyes on them in the next few weeks, and once we start to see little shoots of green coming up from them, then we'll cover those over again, and we're expecting layers of potatoes to build up underneath that, which just baffles me. But it's an exciting trial, and hopefully this box stands the test of time and we have a bunch of tatties to eat come summer.
Well, Hattie and Ben sent us some pictures, and they evidently did get a good crop of tatties from their cardboard box. You can grow potatoes in any kind of container. I would just say that if you're thinking of growing them in a cardboard box like Hattie and Ben, just bear in mind that a cardboard box full of wet soil for up to 5 or 6 months is going to become very soggy and possibly fall apart. So at very least, if you want to move it around, put it on a pallet and choose the thickest, strongest box you possibly can find. And probably better for first earlies, which are quicker than a main crop. But apart from that, it shows that you don't need a fancy pot to grow things. Anything will do. And I haven't managed to sow any seeds outside yet because we've had a very cold late winter, early spring here at Longmeadow, but the sun is now shining and I'm taking the opportunity to sow and plant some broad beans. Broad beans are amongst the very few seeds that will germinate when the soil is quite cold. So you can sow them as soon as you can work the soil, and this now is dry enough. This has been mulched heavily. I've got a variety called Crimson Flowered, and they've got lovely sort of cherry pink flowers, and then they have the green pods. So broad beans are best grown in pairs of rows spaced about 9 inches to a foot apart, with each seed about 9 inches to a foot apart. So in a grid, if you like, and then you can support them and get in between the rows to pick them. And I just make a hole with my finger and pop them in. And because these are raised beds, I'm using a board to kneel on. And the important thing about a raised bed is to reduce compaction. So that's very simple. And I will just gently tickle that over with a rake to cover it. And then I can leave them to get on with it. Now, as well as sowing some broad beans by seed, which should give me a harvest towards the middle or end of June, I've got some to plant out. These are some that I sowed earlier. In fact, on December the 20th, to be precise. The whole point of these is that these will give me a harvest round about the end of May, about 3 weeks earlier than the others. And that is a huge advantage with broad beans because broad beans are so much nicer when they're picked young. So it's better to have 2 or 3 sowings staggered to give you smaller harvests across a longer period. And now these are ready to plant out. You can see they've got a good root system, and these can just go in like that. Firm it in really well. This is a variety called Acqua Dolce. And Acqua Dolce are by far the best variety of broad bean for a very early sowing. And by very early, I mean in autumn or winter. They are hardier and they grow better under low light and cold conditions. So are much more reliable at that time of year. Now, we paid a visit to Clumber Park in Worksop in Nottinghamshire, where the senior gardener, Shirley Roberts, showed us their national collection of rhubarb.
The collection of rhubarb has been at Clumber Park for about 15 years. It came in the early 2000s with our previous head gardener, Chris Margrave. Then throughout those 15 years, I guess through his contacts in the rhubarb world, we introduced more and more cultivars. And we've got over 130 different varieties of rhubarb in our collection. Rhubarb is a plant that originates in Siberia, northeastern China, so it's accustomed to really cold weather, making it a great garden plant for British gardens where we can give it that cold weather over the winter. It It's not particularly picky. It will thrive on a north-facing wall, so it makes it perfect plants for anybody's garden. So to most people, a rhubarb's a rhubarb, isn't it, really? But within those 130 varieties, there are loads of different profiles and characteristics. So profiles of taste. So there are some that have been bred to be really, really sweet. And then at the other end of the spectrum, you've got others that are a lot more sharp. And then others that are going to come in a little bit later in the season, so that you've got a much longer season of picking. So we have so much rhubarb here, we can't really afford to water it, and environmentally it's not a good idea. So what we do instead is we mulch it really thickly with our own homemade compost, even up to about 5 inches of mulch, and that keeps the water in the soil. This variety, good old Timperley Early, brilliant reputation, deservedly so. Lovely long stems, gorgeous pink colour, fantastic flavour. Great for forcing. You can pop a forcing jar on it early in the season or a dustbin and you'll get earlier, sweeter stems, great for a crumble, but it will keep its flavour all season long. So you can cut it until end of July, and when you cut it, don't forget, don't put your secateurs anywhere near it. Get as low down as you can on the stem, give it a little twist, pull, and that's your perfect pick. You can see a small amount of the crown has come away with it. You want to see that little bit of whiteness at the bottom of your stem. A question I'm asked often in the garden by people is why their crowns have stopped producing. And my question to them is, did you have too many crumbles last year? So be really careful about the amount of leaves that you're harvesting off your crown each year. Leave a few stalks on, preferably from the end of July, just so that there'll be goodness going back into that crown for the following year. This one is Fulton Strawberry Surprise, my all-time favourite rhubarb variety. I love it because look how lovely the stems are. They're slender, they're lovely red, and it's got slightly smaller leaves as well. And what I really like about this is, if you had a small garden and you really wanted to grow some rhubarb, you could easily grow this among your flowers. It would give you lovely foliage, lovely red colour. If you weren't too greedy picking it, then it would last quite a while for you, and I think it would add a really nice dimension to your flower border. The important thing to bear in mind about rhubarb is that not all of it is edible. So the stalks, obviously delicious, but the leaves are poisonous. If your rhubarb starts flowering, that's not great because it'll make the flavour a little bit bitter. So as soon as you see a flower appear, snip them off, job done. Well, funnily enough, I don't really like rhubarb. I don't like the taste of it. I love growing it and I love curating the collection. Rhubarb crumble leaves me cold.
Well, I admire Shirley's growing ability of rhubarb, but what a pity she doesn't like it. Rhubarb is a glory at this time of year. Stewed rhubarb, rhubarb crumble, rhubarb fool. Now that's food for kings and queens. Absolutely delicious. Now, it's easy to force rhubarb at this time of year. Now, when people talk about forcing, what they mean is excluding all light, because when it's pitch dark, what you get is rhubarb that grows with a very pale stem, and all the goodness goes into the stem, and they're much sweeter as a result. And this is a rhubarb forcer. This is one I bought second-hand in a sale. And the time to force rhubarb is when the buds are just breaking like this. Those plants in the front, they've too far gone. They've had too much light to respond. But if you put a forcer over it, and by the way, a bucket works perfectly well. I've used a bucket in the past. Just remember to weight it down so it doesn't blow away. And these have a hole in the top simply for inspection. So you want to cover that over. But because there's no light, they grow rather slowly. So don't try and cover them all over. Keep some covered, some uncovered, and you can get a variety of harvests. And now is a good time to plant rhubarb if you've never grown it before. But one word of advice. If you're planting them for the first time, do not harvest them this year. Let the roots have a chance to establish. And then next year, you can start to harvest them and go on doing it for years. They're very long-lived plants. Now, planting rhubarb is a really good job to do this weekend. But here are some more. It's time to cut back deciduous grasses such as Miscanthus. Remove all last year's growth, cutting right back to the ground. This can then be shredded and added to the compost heap. And with light and air, the new green shoots will quickly develop. Even though your ground may not be ready to actually plant out potatoes, it's a good idea to chit seed potatoes, particularly for first earlies. Put them in a seed tray or an egg box, somewhere light and frost-free, and they will develop short, stubby shoots. And in a few weeks' time, they will be ready to plant out. And because the shoots have developed when they're underground, they will grow extra well and quickly. In the depth of winter, the brightest colour comes from the brilliant bark of dogwood. But now, as they start to develop their first leaves, it's time to prune them back. And the harder you cut them, the more vigorous the new growth will be, and it's the new growth that has the brightest bark. The banks of the mound are now filled with colour. The crocuses will soon be over, but the daffodils will grow, and this will be a sheet of yellow in a week or two. And then when they die back, the wildflower seed that we sowed last year will start to flower from May through to July, and then we cut the grass and the cycle continues again. And don't forget that tomorrow is the spring equinox. So from Sunday, our days are longer than our nights, and everything is getting better and better. But that's it for today. I'll be back here at Longmeadow next Friday at 9 o'clock. So until then, bye-bye.